I believe that what I could do that the Greens couldn't do was recognise the problem, get the crossbench to agree on it, pulling together disparate elements of the crossbench, the shooters and the Christian Democrats on one side, the Greens and a collection of independents on the other, get the crossbench together. And what I did was I would see a problem, I would talk to them individually so that they all saw the problem and realised it was true. Then we become a voting bloc. We'd go to the opposition and say, look, we can embarrass the government here. And they'd go, beauty. So I had a majority. And then I'd say to the government, now, I have a sensible idea and I have a majority. Why don't you see reason and do this? And the government would say, ooh, better we do it, the opposition forces too. And they would do it. Now, am I talking hot air here? Look at the inquiries that we had in the period from 1998 to 2007. There was the DOCS inquiry, the mental health inquiry. There were two inquiries into Campbelltown Hospital. There was an inquiry into the Redfern riots, the Macquarie Fields riots, an inquiry into dental health, an inquiry into funerals. Each one of those inquiries I initiated, and I either proposed the motion or negotiated the terms so that it would happen. The Campbelltown Hospital 2 inquiries ended up with $360 million more for South Western Sydney Area Health Service in the following year's budget. The mental health inquiry resulted in $320 million more in the following year's budget, and a completely different accounting system which stopped a lot of other money which was in the bucket leaking to other areas in health. This was one person in Parliament. What I would say to you is there were 3 Greens there at the time. Why didn't they do that? Why didn't they do that? And have the inquiries they've done since I left Parliament had the impact that those inquiries had? I don't believe that they have. So that's why I believe I can do it better than the Greens do. I got 2 pieces of legislation through in the last Parliament. One was the Freedom of Information Bill, which required that government contracts be made public when they were promulgated, and that's been, I believe, neglected. I got it through one night when there was a lag in business, and they said, does anyone have a bill to bring forward? And I said, yes! And the Liberals were feeling very cross, and the blood was in the head, and we managed to get it through the upper house. And I took it down to Clover Moore and said, will you take it to the lower house? And she did, and they pushed it off to a committee, and a couple of people flew to New York and London, because that's what they do when they examine these things carefully. And they recommended that it wasn't that harmful, and it got through, and Clover said, haven't I done a great job? It'd be nice to abolish the states. That has been a Democrat policy for the last 30 years. I have revived it recently. The point is, with technology now, Sydney, Melbourne, Perth are not as far away as they were. We need a good foreign policy, and we need better local coordination. I found that the best model of open government was the New Zealand model, which is called the Official Information Act. Every government document is able to be accessed by the public unless an application is made for the Ombudsman for that file to be kept secret or confidential, and the only grounds for confidentiality are national interest. And the only route of appeal is the Supreme Court. The legislation went through in 1988. It was reviewed in, I think, late 90s, and it was not changed. There were some people who said there was too much money spent in photocopying, and it was decided that the money spent in photocopying was less than the cost of an appeal mechanism telling people that they couldn't apply, so that basically it was still quite good economics to have open government. And the New Zealand government still goes like that, and it's worked reasonably well, certainly much better than in India. I think we should subcontract our universities to study things in the long term and to make a genuine academic study of policy and its success. If you were marketing widgets, you would have a certain proportion of the budget to see where they were being sold, were they good widgets, what was the response, and you would regard that feedback as an integral part of your widget sales. When you're spending millions of government money, it's almost like fashion or dogma. Nobody says, well, hang on, did that work? Did that education change work? Are the kids better educated, worse educated? What went out? What did we lose in social policy and childcare and so on, which has been very controversial, policy for disabled and carers? All these things need to be evaluated, I believe, at length in an academic fashion. I used to talk about evidence-based legislation. well, it's difficult to talk about evidence-based medicine, which is my original profession. That was difficult enough. But evidence-based medicine, people thought I was from outer space. As they racked up the penalties for people, whenever there was a crime, you read in the paper and the shock jocks got up and they would, an adaptation of the Crimes Act, which was, you know, that you'd get just a bit more penalty if you did this or that, since that was the crime committed last week. And they'd all say, we'll send a message to these people. And I would say, yes. When you send a message to somebody, you actually look at their face and you see what they're doing, you see what they say back to you and so on. And if they don't get the message, you might have to do something different. We have twice as many people in jail as the Victorians do, and the crime rate's the same. We need accountability. And even the committees, I tried to get the committees to do original research in the absence of any other research. I said, no, we just get the people in and they tell us. If the answer's out there, we get evidence. We're like a court. We don't actually find out, we ask. So in a sense, the model of information flow into parliaments is wrong as well. So that was another idea I had. In other words, we had an outreach of systematic information. What is the legislation? What's in favour? What's against? Don't rely on the media to do it. Say, what is the legislation? Here's the case. Put it out there and get feedback. I think if you're talking about Sydney sprawl, I think we need a decentralisation plan, a word that hasn't been used since about the 1960s, 70s perhaps. I think Gough Whitlam in the 70s had some decentralisation. No one's used the word since then. My concept is because the broadband is coming to give information flows to the south of the, west of the sandstone curtain, I think the Melbourne to Brisbane rail link going up there would be very good for Western New South Wales. And I think that's what we should be doing. So we stop the urban sprawl in a number of ways. We stop it by having a decentralisation policy so less people come to the city, and we stop it by basically infill density, and we have to have good public transport networks to do that. As far as being accountable for legislation is concerned, my father used to say, more is missed by not looking than by not knowing. Yes. And of course, that in essence is what I was saying about honesty in my speech, that if you don't look because you don't want the answer, if you haven't got any systematic measurement of whether the widows and orphans or whoever you're trying to help are helped, then you won't know if they were helped or not. And of course you can then claim they were helped, or you can... And the other beautiful thing in politics is if someone says, what have you done about this? The answer is always, I've spent this.
Yeah.
Never, I've achieved this, or the result of that. So it's as if I said, well, look, here's some money, I'll throw it on the floor. That shows my commitment. Now, I've got some budget here, which I didn't raise, but I've got. Now I'll put it in there. Now I must have showed my commitment because there it is in dollars. It never says, and the result I got with those dollars is this. So until we have evidence-based legislation, until we systematically look at our programs of subsidies, of education, of alternatives in policy, until we try and work out indices of those things and have them done neutrally apart from the government so they can't be fiddled and they can't, and some is honest inquiry, until we get to the level of sophistication and civilisation to do that, I don't think we can achieve it. At the moment, the answer is you can say what you like about the legislation because there's no black and white evidence systematically connected to say whether it's good, bad or indifferent. And all that happens is the two sound bites. It's good, it's bad. And even so, I think it's actually important. If we want competent government, we've got to actually get down to that level. And I believe we have to get the academics in honest inquiry back into our system, as if that's a neutral body. I mean, otherwise it'll go to some consultant, and then God help us, because consultant's an expert with a briefcase, really, and generally they will say what they have to say to get the next job. We need long-term contracts so that those people can't be bought off. If that can be the public service, that's great. It's been increasingly politicised for good, some good and some evil. Whether we can get academics involved, but only on long-term contracts. I think my answer is, I think, is that academia should do this job, and the public service should be more political. But that's one subject is the idea for a ministry for peace or a department of peace. People say, why would you have a department of peace in the state government? Well, the answer to that is that peace is, in a sense, a state of non-conflict. If you want a state of non-conflict in society, you've got to work for it. Some fellow, I said, if you want peace, prepare for war. Now that assumes that if I prepare for war, you'll be frightened of me and you then won't attack me. Well, you might prepare for war and make more likely because you think I'm preparing for war. With everything else, if you want something, you go towards it. You don't go towards the opposite, right? So let's take the proposition that if you want something, you work towards that. So if you want peace, you work towards peace. Now, if you want harmony in society, you say, well, what are the causes of disharmony? Well, kids get, at risk. They come from dysfunctional families. Their parents have alcohol or gambling problems, and the men beat the women, and the kids then play up at school, and they get bullied, and they become dysfunctional teenagers, and then they rampage, and they join gangs, and they go into jail, and they fall off the system, right? And they say, well, okay, if that's what happens, why don't we take little bits of that and fix it? Why don't we look at the childcare system? Why don't we look at the best policies for drug and alcohol? Why don't we look at school bullying, which is very fashionable at the moment? And indeed, it's interesting that the Liberals want to have more counsellors. I'm a bit on the fence about that because I believe the best way to stop bullying is to talk to the kids and have the kids see it as an aberrant behaviour so that it's kid-focused. But a psychiatrist I was talking to recently said, yes, but bullying is often a symptom of a really basic family problem and you need to get back and do that as well, not just look at the bullying as a symptom. The bullying is a symptom, not a cause of the problem. But in a sense, you've got to take the society apart and look at it. And I believe the Ministry of Peace would try to coordinate that information and bring it to the cabinet table. And the analogy I'd use is, in the old days there was no Department of the Environment. There was a Department of Agriculture, a Department of Fisheries, there was a Department of Mining, there was a Department of State Development, all of which were following an economic model to increase the money coming in. But the environment was an externality, it wasn't costed. If you poured the pollution in the river took it away. That's how it was. I'm talking up to the mid-80s. I can remember accounting that took the environment into account was a new idea in the mid-80s. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Look at that. About the time Karen Sawada was recruiting me to the Democrats, funnily enough. But I believe that just as the Department of the Environment brought that new concept to the table as an advocate for the environment against all the other departments that would harm it, so a Ministry for Peace should say, well, hang on, how do we get social cohesion here against the Department of Economics and the other forces, the Department of Prisons, the police, the Attorney General, the crimes, the moralists, all pushing to punish and to reduce such spending and not to look at the broader picture. So that's the first point. I believe we need a Department of the Environment. We need to think of peace at a local level, at a state level, and of course at a foreign policy level. The other thing I talk about is in terms of prisons. I would say that prisons as they're used at the moment are just in expensive crime training subsidy systems. The cost of keeping one in prison is about $65,000 a year. That would pay for someone to go to a university with accommodations provided and with their own private tutor. So if someone was sentenced for 3 years with their own private tutor to go to a college of learning and to have some accommodation, would that have a better effect than putting someone in jail where they get beaten up, taught how to crime, and when they come out, they've got a marriage, if it still exists, and generally 3 years is a very, very long time for any relationship to survive. So they have no relationship, nowhere to live, no particular skills, and a considerable distrust of their fellow humans. That's what we're doing, and it's interesting that with the same crime rate, New South Wales has roughly twice as many people in jail as Victoria, and the Americans have 0.74% of their whole population in jail.
There are also substantially more children in jail, I believe, in New South Wales, and of those a very high percentage of Aboriginals.
The Aboriginal incarceration rate is a national scandal as well. So I think we need to say, well, there's all that money, how are you going to fix these problems? Well, perhaps if you had a more humane approach based on honesty, tolerance and compassion, perhaps, you could actually... And evidence. You could actually find out what's going on and spend your money more wisely. So I'm in for prison reform as well. And I think a more enlightened approach to that is needed.